Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction. I just wanted to apologise that I don't speak Japanese. I had intended to try and learn Japanese, but I've discovered that it's a really complicated language, so apologies for that. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here and see so many people here today as well. We've been over for about 5 days. We've had the most incredible experience here in Japan. And what I'm going to do now is take you through some of the work that I've been doing over the last 20 years or so in London and indeed in the UK. So I wanted to start off by just giving you an idea of how does one become an arts director within this field of arts and health. You know, at the moment in the UK there isn't a qualification that you can do to get that experience, and I just want to give you a flavour of how I've arrived at where I am now. So my art education, so the first thing is, as Professor Suzuki mentioned, I'm an artist. I'm probably not a very good artist, otherwise I'd still be working just as an artist. So I did a diploma in design. I then went on to do a foundation in fine art. Then I did a degree in fine art, and then I moved to Germany and did film and installation work. So my work history, my first job was working with people with learning disabilities. I ran an organisation that worked across London, working with all art forms, and the main focus of that work was to work within established arts venues. I then, worked with people that were at risk using drama and theatre to look at resolving conflict resolution, and then was director of Wising Arts in Cambridge. It was during my time at Wising Arts when we were doing a lot of collaborative work, so artists and scientists were working together, and from that we were creating new work. And we did one project which was working with a heart surgeon and an artist called Jordan Baseman. And I used to go into the hospital to meet the surgeon, Francis Wells. And I remember just going through the entrance of the hospital, I started to feel ill. The lights, the smell. And I thought, gosh, if you could do something to improve this environment. Because at the same time, I was building new artist studios and looking at the importance of architecture and good design. I thought, well, if you could try and get that right within the hospital, how powerful could that be? Then I moved down to southwest of England and worked in a big hospital called Arafat Hospital. It has about 1,400 beds. And my job was about working with setting up an arts and health project in a hospital that didn't have one, but also major building programs. So we were creating huge new developments. We had budgets of around 800 million, so significant projects. At the same time, I was working within a medical school, so working with doctors that were being trained. And part of my role there was involving them in projects that I was delivering. And I think that is so important in terms of a new generation of doctors, exposing them to this kind of work. And then my last job before where I am now was director of the Royal Academy in Bristol. There, my challenge was to develop the organisation, to modernise it. It had very poor audiences. It wasn't really known, so I was looking at getting more people in through the doors. So I put on quite a populist programme. We had an 8-fold increase in audiences. And then they approached me about the job in London. What excited me about that was a hospital has thousands of people going through every day. And I thought, well, you know, if I can get the art that I'm working with right, the potential for change and exposing people to different art forms, but also using art in a very powerful way when people most need it. So Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. So the yellow and blue areas are the areas in London that we cover. And my job is to offer a first-class experience for everyone within the building. The hospital is unusual in that it is very light, it's very airy. When it was opened in 1993, a lot of consideration was given to the quality of air within the building, the lights of the whole hospital is flooded with light. So we have a large art collection. When the hospital opened, a number of works were commissioned as part of the building process. But we also had a history before the hospital moved on to the new site. So the picture on the left-hand side is our oldest piece of work. It's by an Italian artist called Paolo Veronese. And this hangs in the chapel. It's very unusual to have a work of this kind within a hospital. So we have over 2,000 works which are displayed in all parts of the hospital, so in the public areas, but most importantly in the clinical areas. The works are by a range of different artists, so we have very popular, well-known artists through to artists that are just starting out. For me, that is a really important part of our work, is that we've got a good representation of different artists within our collection. One of the things that I've found is that we're often treating within the hospital patients that are artists themselves. So, for example, the picture at the top here is by an artist called Albert Urban. He was treated in the hospital for many years. He's a Royal Academician, so he's a well-known artist. He used to come to our hospital quite frequently. Unfortunately, he was ill, and he used to get the tube to Earl's Court and then walk down a road called Hollywood Road, and this picture here is called Hollywood. We have a lot of partnerships, so we work with a lot of volunteers, we work with partner organisations. So if you think when I was back at the Royal Academy, I was looking to get several hundred people through the doors. That was difficult. In the hospital, I have thousands every day, and our partners can see the value of working with us because it's giving exposure to perhaps new audiences that might not have been into their venues. And practically what this looks like is, for example, with the Royal Opera House, bottom middle image there, it's very expensive to go there. Every year they give us around 500 tickets, which means for the lower paid members of staff and nurses, they can go and see an opera for £1. Now, how incredible is that? Another thing we do is we have, say, from the British Museum or the Victoria and Albert Museum, bringing in artefacts or part of that collection to work with patients within the hospital. So again, exposing them to different organisations. They have specialists that are working all the time in this kind of programme. So for me, it's a very easy way of extending the work that we're doing. And the final part of the partner work is temporary exhibitions. So we have 3 exhibition spaces which are temporary, so bottom right-hand corner here. They curate that space. So again, very simple for me. I don't need to worry about it. They've got professionals that will come in and curate it. I have oversight in terms of ensuring that the work is appropriate for the hospital, but it runs itself in a really easy way of working. We've recently started doing quite a lot of work with digital media, so screen-based work. The image here is showing a work called Stones Against Diamonds by Isaac Julian. He's a very well-known English filmmaker. This is a site-specific work. This kind of work we see as being more temporary. So if we're curating spaces, we can quickly change if it's screen-based. So we have a program of work within the atrium, but most importantly within the clinical areas. So what I've done is I've moved away from creating permanent work, which might stay in a hospital for perhaps 30 years, to looking at the environment and thinking, well, what is the best approach for this space? Are there a set of problems that I need to address? Which could change. Hospitals are fluid environments. For us, space is a real issue. Maybe that in 3 years' time we need to build in this area because we're constrained in terms of we can't build out beyond the hospital walls. So I need to be flexible. So generally what we're looking at is an artist in residence. So they will work with us for a period of time. We will get to know them. They'll get to know the environment and the staff. It's a much more effective way of working if they've had exposure to patients, to their families, engaging with them in the process of actually developing the artwork. So this is a birthing centre which we worked with an artist called Laurie Hastings. So she created artwork for the walls, but she also looked at the whole environment, so the surfaces, what were the colours that we were going to use, the lighting. So the relationship with the architects and the design team and the artist was a really essential part of this project. As part of doing this project, she also created a series of prints, which we sell. So those are for sale. The women can buy them. They're very cheap. They're not expensive. So that's been really interesting in terms of us generating income, but also people starting to buy artwork. So that's something we're aware of as well, the idea of buying work, of having a collection. So the next area is our emergency department. So a very busy environment, lots of issues. So this was a new area that we developed, and it was the first time where we worked very closely with the hospital in terms of working together, creating a space which could tackle some of the problems that existed within that unit. So we worked with 12 artists, a range of different artists. So, for example, the artist on the top left-hand side, that is by an artist called Brian Eno, who is pretty well known in the UK. And he created a garden, and then he filmed it. So it's a moving artwork in a waiting area, and the aim behind that is that it distracts and calms patients as they're waiting. And then the image on the top right-hand side, that's by an American artist called Monica Bravo. So I saw her work at the Venice Biennale. I thought there's no way she'll be interested, so I sent her an email, and she responded pretty much straight away. So I'm very much of the mind, if you don't ask, you don't get. And I think we've been very lucky in terms of approaching quite high-profile artists who are very open to working with us, and that doesn't mean it's going to cost a huge budget. Often they just want to give something back to society or to a hospital. And then the two lower images are by emerging artists, and these had a very practical function in that they were in treatment areas, and they were aiming to distract patients when painful or unpleasant things were being done to them. And I'll talk a little bit later in terms of some of that evidence base. A general point to kind of say about this project is it never ends. We're always going back and reworking and learning from things that we've done. The other thing is that we look after all of the work that we're putting in, so we don't expect the hospital to do that. That's part of my team's role, to make sure that things, if they break, they're fixed, if things get damaged, that they're replaced. So I think that's a really important consideration when you're doing projects in hospitals. This is our cinema. So we have a cinema which is about the same size as this room. It's a space that long-term patients can go into, so we can bring the beds in, and they can enjoy a film with their family and friends. So the latest release that you might see in the cinema elsewhere in London. And the image on the top, on the side there, that is by an artist called Andy Council. So he worked with children in the Children's Hospital, looking at local landmarks of buildings, and created these two rhinos. So it's a really good kind of example of the approach in terms of bringing an artist in who then works within the hospital and creates a piece of work. And again, with this work, there is a print, so there's a limited edition print which people can buy. I mentioned the moving image program, so this is called Relax Digital, and it's just simple scenes. We have about 60 hours of content, just relaxing, a boat coming into a harbour, setting sail, sheep in a field, a range of different experiences. A lot of our waiting areas don't have windows or daylight, so this has been a really simple way of bringing the outside world in. It's also very cheap and very quick, so if something's not working, we can change it, or if we want to bring in a new piece of work, we can do that. In some of our areas, we look at humour, so how can we make people smile or perhaps even laugh? That's maybe not appropriate for all areas, but for some areas it is. So this is a project where it's a veterinary hospital. So pets are coming in and they're waiting to see the vet. So this is one of the films that we've got in our Relax Digital programme. And then this is a project we've done called The Zoo. So this is for our emergency department, and it's to distract paediatric patients when they're having painful or unpleasant things done to them. We've done a study looking at the impact of this. So this is on a large screen. It's about the size of a large television. It's on the wall. And what we found is that there's an 87% reduction in perception of pain. But if we're wanting to take bloods, it might have taken 7 minutes, and roughly we're able to do it in about half the time. So that's better for the children, it's better for the doctors, and ultimately better for the hospital because they can see more patients, which means more income. So I mentioned the different artists that we work with, and I just thought I'd give you a flavour of that. So this is Martha Armitage. She's, I think, 85 now. She has a studio quite near us and was working with us on creating hand-printed wallpaper for a cardiothoracic environment. So we are doing a lot of work which is digital, but equally important are those traditional approaches and using materials. So with Martha, she came in and worked with older people. Some of the people were actually younger than her, on the wards creating lino cuts and then printing those. This is a French artist who's working with us, and she's looking at drawing. So in our hospital, we've gone from being analogue to digital, so we're looking at how is mark making used within the hospital. So we didn't have a particular aim when we started off. I just knew she was a really interesting artist. I was confident that she would deliver an interesting project, but when we started, we didn't know what that would be. So you can see here she's in the nurse's uniform. That is a way that we often work. I mean, there are times when I'll put on the scrubs as well to go into an environment and understand it. It's a really good way of getting to know the team, but also hearing back from the patients. So Anouk was researching the hospital, and she found this photograph. This is from 1919. It was in our hospital, and the man who's sitting in the middle, we know who he is. His name is on the bottom, but none of the nurses were identified. So what Anouk's been doing is redrawing these women. So these are pencil drawings. It takes about 3 days to do each drawing. And as part of that process, she's researching into identifying who they were. But it has a bigger focus, which is looking at the role of women within healthcare and in particular nursing. So with our patients, we have workshops happening every day. So we'll have artists coming in and working within the ward areas. It's all art forms, all kinds of approaches. With this work, we also look to show it. So if patients are happy with that, we'll put it in one of our temporary exhibition areas. So we have an exhibition up at the moment. I think that's really positive in terms of people being able to come back and see their work, or also families just having exposure to the work that's happening on the wards. I mentioned the partnership work, so the image on the top left-hand side there, that's runway dance, so dancers working within intensive care, looking at how they can mobilise patients in different ways. And we found that for the physiotherapists or the occupational therapists working in the hospitals, they've sometimes learnt new approaches as well. So, you know, if a patient is being resistant to mobilising, perhaps if they're doing a dance move, they won't realise that they're actually doing the exercise that the physio is trying to get them to do. We also work with animals, so probably everyone knows if you stroke a dog, generally your blood pressure will go down, it will make you feel more relaxed. So we have a programme of bringing dogs into the hospital, and I'm told that they're cleaner than many of the visitors that are coming in. So they go through a process in terms of infection control, but this programme is working really well. We would do a lot of work with music, so again we have music making on the wards, looking at how patients, we might have a 6-bedded bay, patients making music together across between the beds. So I have a member of my team who runs this work. Every day, Monday to Friday, there is activity happening. Then we'll have professional performers coming in. They will perform in the atrium space. So we have the dancers on the left-hand side, which go around the wards. They will have done a performance down in the atrium before they go onto the ward. So I mentioned the impact work. So we've been measuring the impact of our projects for many years. I think that's important in terms of proving the value of arts and health. You're all here because you're interested in this work, but that is not the case with everyone. So I think it's really important to have an evidence base. The figures here give you an idea of some of the findings that we found. So we are committed to continuing to do research. So at the moment we've got 4 PhD students working within my programme. So we've got 2 of them at the bottom here. The one on the left-hand side is looking at staff, so around communication and building design. So how does the layout of a ward affect communication and then patient care? And then the bottom right-hand image, that's looking at eye tracking. So looking at patients' eyes and what we can learn from those. So something we're particularly focused on is delirium. So it's a condition which is quite serious. You're 4 times more likely to die in 12 months if you get this. And from the research that we're doing, it appears that a certain kind of eye movement will give you an idea that a patient is going into an episode of delirium. And if that's the case, there are interventions that you can undertake to stop that happening. We've been doing a lot of work with sensors. With technology now, we can learn so much quite simply. For example, from my phone, it will tell me how well I've slept, how many steps I've taken during the day. So we're looking at how can we build in that kind of technology into a hospital environment and get feedback about the work that we're undertaking. So a very simple example of this is we have a setup with 4 buttons, sad or happy. People just press whichever one they find. And this is in response to a question which we're asking them. So it's a very quick way of getting data back. So we have other monitors which are remote, where there's no interaction with the patients, but here there is, and it's been very successful. We're also looking at virtual reality, how we could use that within a hospital environment. So we have a strand of work which we call the Future Hospital, and that's really trying to find appropriate ways to use technology within a hospital environment. So we're commissioning the content that goes on the headset, and this is an example of where, you know, with our partner organisations, so for example with the British Museum, there is a museum experience, so patients can choose what they want. It could be a gallery, it could be something in the natural world, so the one here is a journey down the Thames in a boat. And we have a very practical application of this approach. So we're working within the catheter lab. So we have a procedure which takes around 40 minutes. We're using virtual reality for patients that choose to have it instead of having the pain relief. So instead of having analgesic, they will elect to use the virtual reality. For many years, we've known that the connection with plants and the landscape is good. It's called biophilia and has a really positive impact within a healing environment. So the image on the left-hand side there shows a garden that we've created within the atrium. But in the UK, at the moment, you generally can't have plants within a ward environment. So, for example, you can't take flowers in. You couldn't have a plant next to your bed. So we're looking at how can we create artificial plants, so virtual plants. So we've got a team that are working on this. We've got a robotics lab. We've got an artist in Korea. And the aim is to create a plant which can be by the patient's bed, which is dynamic so they can interact with it, but it's not real. So with all of this work, it is experimental, and my experience with technology is it often won't work. So we factor that in. So for example, with the virtual reality work, we've gone through 3 different headsets in the last 7 months. New ones have come out. So I think this is one small element of our work. The main thrust is around more of the traditional approaches and things which we know what the outcome will be. But it's interesting to push what is there in terms of technology, but we recognise that it doesn't always work. We're also looking at robots as a companion. So this, you may well know, it's a Japanese invention, has been very successful in working with older people. So we're working with Pero within our hospital. Again, we've had a really positive response. And we're also looking at alternatives as well. So we've got another one called Mira, which we're looking at using. So this is getting information. There are cameras in the eyes. It will recognise the patient. It will work out their heart rate, how much they're breathing. So it's a simple way of gathering data about patients, but also calming them down. So at the moment, we're using this within paediatric waiting areas, and it's had really good results. We have music everywhere in the hospital, so literally most rooms there'll be music which is part of my programme. That is music that we've chosen, and we're mindful that that may not work for everyone. So we have this project here where patients can bring in their own music, and we can put it through this software and it will calm them down. So for example, they might be listening to music which is at 110 beats per minute, which won't calm them down. But this software will change the speed of the music. They still hear the same music, but it is actually running at about 70 beats per minute. So it's a simple way of using patients' own music to calm them down. This is our intensive care unit. So at the moment we're rebuilding this. This is how it looks at the moment. If you come and see it next year, it will look completely different. So this has been a really good real-world environment for trying out a number of the things that I've mentioned. One of the things that I'm really mindful of is sleep, how important sleep is. If you have a bad night's sleep, that has a real impact in terms of well-being. But at the moment, many of our hospital environments are very noisy. That's bad for patients, but it's also bad for staff. They may not be able to concentrate as well. And there's a body of research that shows that above a certain number of decibels, people will start to make mistakes. So we're looking at how we can create an optimised environment. So at the moment we're learning from the environment we have, and then when we have the new space we'll be able to look at the impact. Then we're looking at circadian rhythms, so day to night, measuring the impact of that. And then developing new technology. So these little sensors here are something that we've developed which is monitoring the different things within the unit. We have a problem with the internet down here. So I was going to connect live to the hospital now to show you. So this is data which I downloaded about an hour ago, which I'll scroll through. So this is all live. It's collected every 5 seconds. This is looking at noise levels. The World Health Organization recommends decibel levels of no more than 35 for an intensive care unit. This was about an hour and a half ago, and you can see that it's well above that. So moving on to talk about staff. So we involve staff in all of the projects that we're running. This was in developing the designs for the new intensive care units. So we held workshops, consultation, and then we built a kind of mock-up. So the bottom right-hand image is made out of cardboard, just experimenting with space. So in that process, we'll also involve artists and designers. And then funding. So we are entirely funded charitably, so we don't get any money from the hospital. We raise it all ourselves. So I think what I found really important is to have big ideas, to be ambitious, and to involve as many stakeholders in that process as possible. So these pictures here are what our new intensive care unit is going to look like. So looking at the future, we're going to be building new partnerships, and I hope some of those partnerships could be in Japan. We're looking at sharing our work as well. So things that we developed at the hospital we're now offering free of charge to other hospitals. So, for example, some of the digital projects we've done, really simple way of extending the reach of our work. We're going to be opening a studio space, so that'll be opening in January. So that's a studio space within the hospital for artists, and lots more projects. And I'd be delighted to follow up a conversation. So these are my contact details. Please get in touch at any time. But thank you very much for listening.